The Galactic Council Chamber was packed that day. Representatives from hundreds of worlds sat in their designated sections, some floating in containment fields, others perched on specialized seating designed for their unique physiologies. The usual chatter and political maneuvering filled the air until the central hologram activated. Then everything stopped. The footage began to play, and you could hear the collective intake of breath across the massive chamber. There, projected in crystal-clear detail, was the olive branch. The ship hung motionless against the backdrop of stars, but something was terribly wrong. Its white hull, designed to symbolize peace and new beginnings, was scarred with dozens of plasma burns. Sections of the vessel were torn open, exposing the interior to the vacuum of space. Small debris floated around it, pieces of what had once been a functioning spacecraft. It wasn't just damage, it was dead. Ambassador Rebecca Foster had launched from Earth 6 months earlier with such hope. The humans had prepared for this moment for decades, ever since they'd figured out how to fold space and join the rest of the galaxy. Foster wasn't a soldier or a politician in the traditional sense. She was a teacher, a scientist, and an artist. Earth had chosen her specifically because she represented the best of what humanity wanted to share. Her cargo holds were filled with paintings, music, literature translated into the common galactic language, and scientific data that humans had gathered about their corner of space. She came bearing gifts, not weapons. The Crithian Empire had received Earth's messages. They knew Foster was coming. They knew she was unarmed. They knew the olive branch carried no military technology, no soldiers, nothing that could possibly threaten their vast empire that stretched across 200 worlds. The humans had made sure everyone understood their intentions. This was a peaceful mission, a hello to the galactic community, an invitation to friendship. The hologram shifted, showing the moments before the attack. Foster's face appeared, recorded from her final transmission. She was speaking calmly, professionally, explaining humanity's desire for peaceful relations. Her voice carried hope and excitement. Behind her, you could see her small crew go about their duties, completely unaware of what was about to happen. The timestamp showed this was recorded just 3 minutes before the end. Then the weapons fire began. The footage captured it all from a nearby monitoring station. Crithian warships, massive vessels bristling with weapons, emerged from faster-than-light travel. They didn't hail the olive branch. They didn't issue warnings. They simply opened fire. The first volley of plasma bolts struck the ship's engines, crippling it instantly. The second volley tore through the hull. The third ensured there would be no survivors. The final moments were the hardest to watch. Foster managed to trigger an emergency broadcast, her face appearing one last time on screens across the galaxy. Blood ran down her temple from where she'd struck something during the attack. Alarms blared in the background. You could see the fear in her eyes, but also confusion. She was trying to understand why this was happening. Her last words were simple. "Please, we came in peace. We just wanted to talk. Why are you doing this?" Then static. Then nothing. The olive branch went dark, another piece of debris floating in the endless void. The council chamber remained silent as the footage ended. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. This wasn't warfare between established powers. This wasn't a territorial dispute or political maneuvering. This was murder, plain and simple. The Crithian Empire had killed an unarmed diplomatic envoy, and they'd done it deliberately. The council members began shifting in their seats, uncomfortable with what they'd witnessed. Many of them had dismissed humanity when they first arrived on galactic stage. Humans were newcomers, barely a century into faster-than-light technology. They controlled only a handful of worlds. Their ships were primitive compared to the elder races. Their understanding of galactic politics was naive at best. Most council members had assumed humanity would either fail and retreat back to their home system, or spend centuries learning their place in the established order. But something about the human delegate's face made them reconsider. General William Carter stood in the human section, watching the footage with an expression that sent chills through even the most warlike species present. It wasn't the hot rage they expected. It wasn't grief or shock. It was something far more dangerous. Carter's face showed cold, controlled fury. The kind of anger that doesn't explode. The kind that calculates. Plans. Waits. The council chair, an ancient being who had mediated disputes for 3 centuries, cleared his throat. His voice wavered slightly as he spoke. This is indeed a tragedy. The council extends its deepest sympathies to humanity for this unprovoked attack. We will form an investigation committee immediately. The Crithian Empire will be asked to explain their actions. There will be hearings, resolutions, perhaps sanctions. Carter didn't respond immediately. He simply stood there, staring at the spot where Foster's face had been moments before. When he finally moved, it was just a simple nod. No words. No demand for justice. No threats. He turned and walked toward the exit, his footsteps echoing in the silent chamber. Within 6 hours, every human embassy across the galaxy went dark. Not destroyed. Not attacked. Simply closed. Staff evacuated. Doors sealed. The humans were leaving civilized space, and they were doing it fast. Trade ships that had been in the middle of negotiations suddenly departed without explanation. Human colonies stopped responding to communications. It was as if humanity had decided to pull back from the galaxy entirely. But this wasn't retreat. Anyone paying attention would have noticed something else. Every human vessel, every station, every outpost vanished from scanners at almost the same moment. Thousands of ships gone. That kind of coordination didn't happen by accident. That was planning. That was purpose. The galaxy had seen rage before. They'd seen wars that lasted centuries, species that fought to extinction, empires that burned worlds in their fury. But they'd never seen this. Absolute silence. Calculated withdrawal. The quiet before something terrible. 21 days after the Olive Branch incident, the Crithian Empire threw itself a party. The capital world lit up with celebrations that could be seen from orbit. Military parades marched through every major city, with massive war machines rolling down boulevards while crowds cheered. Holographic displays showed the destroyed human ship over and over, edited and packaged as entertainment. The message was clear. The Crithian Empire remained the dominant power in this sector, and anyone who challenged them would meet the same fate. The Crithian Emperor gave a speech that was broadcast across their territory. He stood on a balcony overlooking millions of his subjects, his voice booming with confidence. We have shown these newcomers their place. The humans came here thinking they could simply insert themselves into our galaxy, into our established order. We taught them a lesson about power, about strength. And what did they do? They ran. They fled like cowards back to their primitive corner of space. Let this be a lesson to all who would challenge the Crithian Empire. The crowds roared their approval. Propaganda networks spent hours analyzing humanity's retreat, bringing in military experts who explained how the humans had shown their weakness. They were soft, these experts claimed, emotional, unable to handle the realities of galactic politics. It was better they learned this lesson now and stayed in their own systems where they belonged. But not everyone was celebrating. In quiet offices across the galaxy, intelligence analysts were reviewing data that made them deeply uncomfortable. The human colonies hadn't just gone silent. Something else was happening, something that didn't match the narrative of a frightened species running home to hide. Reports started coming in from freighters that had passed near human space. They described massive energy signatures, the kind associated with industrial construction on a scale rarely seen. Long-range scans showed unusual activity around every human world. But getting close enough to see what was actually happening proved impossible. The humans had sealed their borders completely. One intelligence officer, a female operative working for a species that bordered human territory, decided to take matters into her own hands. Her people had always maintained good relations with humanity, trading peacefully and respecting each other's boundaries. She thought maybe, just maybe, she could slip past whatever defenses the humans had erected and see what was really going on. She had to know if the humans were okay, or if they were preparing for something bigger. Her small stealth ship crossed into human space 3 weeks after the incident. At first, everything seemed normal. Empty space, distant stars, nothing unusual. Then she got closer to the first human colony world, and her instruments started picking up readings that made no sense. The energy output from the planet had increased by 3,000%. 3,000. That was impossible. No civilization could scale up their power generation that quickly. She activated her recording equipment and moved closer, keeping her stealth systems at maximum. What she saw made her forget to breathe for a moment. Orbiting the planet were structures so massive they dwarfed anything she'd ever seen. They weren't stations. They were shipyards, but calling them that felt inadequate. Each one was the size of a small moon, bristling with construction arms, fabrication systems, and docking bays. And inside those shipyards, ships were being built. Thousands of them. But these weren't the exploration vessels humanity had been using. These weren't colony ships or scientific research platforms. These were warships, and their design was like nothing in the galactic database. Angular hulls that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Weapon systems built into the very structure of the ships. No decorative elements, no wasted space. Pure function, pure efficiency, pure depth. She recorded everything, her hands shaking as she maneuvered her ship to get better angles. Every human colony she passed showed the same thing. Massive construction projects, all military in nature. The humans had converted their entire industrial capacity to war production, and they'd done it in less than a month. The scale was horrifying. The elder races had spent centuries building their fleets. Humanity was doing it in weeks. Her ship's computer analyzed the designs and came back with estimates that couldn't possibly be right. The weapon systems alone represented technology decades ahead of anything currently in use. The power cores were running on principles that shouldn't work according to known physics. The propulsion systems seemed to ignore conventional limitations on faster-than-light travel. How had humanity developed all this? Had they been hiding their true capabilities all along? She managed to get her recordings back across the border and transmitted them to the Galactic Council immediately. Within hours, the footage was spreading through every intelligence network in the galaxy. Diplomats who had dismissed humanity as primitives now watched in growing horror as the recording showed shipyard after shipyard, weapon system after weapon system, all of it being built at impossible speed. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. The chamber that had been so quiet 3 weeks ago now erupted in chaos. Species shouted at each other, demanding answers, pointing fingers, arguing about what should be done. Some claimed the footage was fake, that humans couldn't possibly achieve this level of construction. Others argued that humanity must have been planning this all along, that they'd hidden their true military strength. The council chair tried to restore order, calling for calm and rational discussion. We need to establish communication with humanity immediately. This situation requires dialogue, not speculation. Whatever they're building, whatever they're planning, we need to talk to them before this escalates further. Messages were sent to Earth. Dozens of them. Formal diplomatic requests. Informal back-channel communications. Pleas from species that had been friendly with humanity. All of them went unanswered. The silence from human space was absolute. Finally, the Council decided to send a delegation. Not warships, but peaceful diplomatic vessels from 3 of the eldest races. Species that had maintained galactic peace for millennia. Surely humanity would respond to them. Surely they would at least talk before doing something drastic. Finally, the Council decided to send a delegation. Not warships, but peaceful diplomatic vessels from 3 of the eldest races. Species that had maintained galactic peace for millennia. Surely humanity would respond to them. Surely they would at least talk before doing something drastic. The delegation ships approached the boundary of human space, broadcasting their intentions on every frequency. They carried no weapons. Their shields were down. They came in peace, hoping to prevent whatever was about to happen. They never made it across the border. Defensive systems appeared out of nowhere, materializing around the diplomatic ships like ghosts. Not attacking, just present. Weapons that tracked their movements with perfect precision. The message was clear. Go no further. Then a single transmission came through. The first words humanity had spoken to the galaxy in 3 weeks. The voice was calm, almost emotionless. It could have been human or an artificial intelligence. Nobody could tell. You had your chance for peace. Rebecca Foster carried that chance with her. You watched her die. You did nothing. Now you will stand aside, or you will stand with them. Choose. The diplomatic vessels retreated. There was nothing else they could do. They returned to the council and reported what had happened, what they'd seen. The defensive systems alone represented technology that shouldn't exist. And behind those defenses, humanity was building something that terrified even the oldest species in the galaxy. The Crithian Empire continued their celebrations, but their intelligence services had seen the same footage as everyone else. Some of their analysts were starting to suggest that maybe, just maybe, they'd made a terrible mistake. The attack happened on day 52, at exactly 0400-hour Galactic Standard Time. The Crithian Border Station Outpost 17 was monitoring routine traffic when every system suddenly registered something impossible. Energy readings spiked to levels that shouldn't exist in normal space. Then the station simply vanished. Not destroyed in the traditional sense. It just stopped being there. One moment, a fully operational military installation with 3,000 personnel. The next moment, empty space. Not even debris remained. Within minutes, reports flooded in from across the Crithian border. Outpost 19 gone. Station 42 gone. The fortress installation at Kelmer Prime, which had stood for 800 years and was considered impregnable, gone. 27 military installations ceased to exist in the span of 10 minutes. The weapons that destroyed them struck from somewhere else, somewhere the Crithians didn't even know existed. Their sensors detected nothing before the attacks. No ships, no energy signatures, no warnings. Just instant annihilation. The Crithian military command went into full alert. Admirals who had been celebrating their victory over humanity 3 weeks ago now scrambled to understand what was happening. Their defensive networks showed nothing. No enemy fleet approaching. No conventional attack patterns. Just their stations disappearing one by one, erased from existence by weapons that seemed to ignore every law of physics they understood. Then the human ships appeared, and everything got worse. They didn't come from outside Crithian space. They materialized inside it, deep within their territory, past every defensive line, every sensor grid, every early warning system. One moment, empty space. The next, human warships sitting in orbit above major Crithian worlds. It was impossible. Ships couldn't disappear like that. Space travel didn't work that way. But there they were. The ships looked exactly like the recordings from 3 weeks ago. Dark, angular vessels that seemed to drink in light rather than reflect it. But seeing them in person was different. They moved wrong. They'd phase out of existence, then reappear somewhere else. They'd pass through solid objects like ghosts. Crithian weapons fire would hit them, and the shots would simply vanish into nothing, as if the human ships existed slightly outside normal reality. A Crithian patrol fleet engaged one of these vessels near a mining colony. 50 ships against one. The human ship didn't even slow down. It released something, some kind of weapon that expanded outward in a sphere. When the sphere touched the Crithian vessels, they tore apart from the inside out. The human ship continued on its way, completely undamaged, leaving 50 wrecks behind. The Crithian Emperor ordered a full military response. This was what their empire had been built for. They fought wars against dozens of species over the centuries and won every time. Their fleet was the largest in the sector. 12,000 warships ranging from nimble destroyers to massive dreadnoughts that could crack planets. Surely sheer numbers would overcome whatever tricks these humans had developed. The fleet mobilized from bases across Crithian space, converging on the Kethra system where the largest concentration of human ships had been detected. The Crithian admiral, a veteran of 40 campaigns, studied the tactical displays. His scouts counted roughly 400 human vessels. He had 12,000. The math was simple. They would overwhelm the humans through pure firepower, and this nightmare would end. The battle began at 1,623 hours. The Crithian fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel, in a perfect formation, a wall of steel and plasma that had crushed empires before. They opened fire immediately, thousands of weapons unleashing enough destructive power to sterilize a dozen worlds. The space between the fleets lit up with energy bolts, missiles, and beam weapons. But the human ships moved like nothing the Crithians had ever encountered. They didn't dodge in the traditional sense. They existed in multiple places at once, flickering in and out of reality. Weapons that should have hit them passed through empty space. And when the humans returned fire, their weapons did things that made seasoned military officers question their sanity. One human vessel fired a projectile that seemed to arrive before it was launched. The Crythian ship it targeted exploded. Then moments later the weapon appeared and entered the debris field. Causality itself was breaking down. Time wasn't flowing the right way. Another human weapon created a sphere of twisted space-time, and every Crythian ship caught in it aged centuries in seconds, their hulls corroding and collapsing as if they'd been floating in space for millennia. The Crythian admiral tried to adapt. He'd trained for this, practiced against every known combat doctrine. But there was no doctrine for this. His ships were fighting an enemy that didn't follow the rules of warfare as he understood them. An enemy that could strike from the past or future. An enemy whose shields existed in dimensions his weapons couldn't reach. 17 minutes after it began, the battle was over. The tactical display told a story that the admiral couldn't process. 12,000 Crythian warships reduced to debris and radiation. The human fleet remained intact. Not a single vessel lost. Not even damaged. They fought the largest fleet engagement in Crythian history, and won without taking a single casualty. It wasn't just a victory. It was a demonstration. A message written in the wreckage of an armada. Across the galaxy, other species watched the battle through their intelligence networks. Every major power had monitoring stations in the region, recording everything for analysis. What they saw terrified them in ways they couldn't articulate. The elder races had spent thousands of years developing their technology, refining their weapons, perfecting their military strategies. Humanity had been in space for barely a century, but humans had approached their scientific development differently. While other species formed committees and councils, debated ethics and implications, moved slowly and carefully, humanity had charged forward with reckless abandon. They'd been solving problems that other species considered impossible or too dangerous. Faster-than-light communication with zero time lag, allowing perfect coordination across vast distances. Gravitational manipulation, letting them create artificial gravity or crush enemy ships with focused gravitational waves. Weapons that operated in higher dimensions, striking targets that existed in normal space, while the weapons themselves existed somewhere else entirely. The elder races had been playing politics while humanity quietly revolutionized physics. And now, directed by grief and fury, all of that scientific advancement had been weaponized. Every breakthrough, every discovery, every innovation that humanity had achieved had been turned toward one purpose: the complete destruction of the Crythian Empire. The Galactic Council watched the footage from Kethra in silence. They thought they understood the limits of technology, the boundaries of what was possible. Humanity had just shown them how wrong they were. And the worst part was the realization that this was just the beginning. The humans weren't done. They were just getting started. In the ruins of the Kethra system, a single human ship broadcast a message on all frequencies. No threats, no demands, just coordinates and a timestamp. The location of the next target. The Crythians had 48 hours to evacuate their civilians. After that, the human fleet was coming, and nothing in the galaxy could stop them. The galaxy had never fractured like this before. Within days of the Kethra system massacre, the political landscape that had remained stable for centuries began tearing itself apart. Emergency sessions were called. Alliances that had lasted millennia started showing cracks. Every species had to make a choice, and there were no good options. The Valdrine Confederation was the first to take a stand against humanity. Their representatives stood before the Galactic Council and spoke with righteous fury about the human assault. They called it genocide, barbarism, a threat to all civilized life. The Valdrine had always prided themselves on being peacekeepers, mediators who resolved conflicts through dialogue and compromise. What humanity was doing violated everything they believed in. Within a week, they'd formed a coalition with 6 other species, all committed to stopping the human advance by force if necessary. But not everyone saw it that way. In the Outer Rim territories, species that had suffered under Crythian occupation for generations watched humanity's campaign with very different eyes. The Crythian Empire hadn't built itself through peaceful expansion. They'd conquered, subjugated, and oppressed dozens of worlds. They'd strip-mined planets, enslaved populations, and crushed any resistance with overwhelming force. For these species, humanity wasn't committing atrocities. Humanity was delivering justice that the Galactic Council had failed to provide for centuries. Intelligence packages started arriving at human military installations. Anonymous data drops containing Crythian fleet positions, defensive layouts, supply routes, and communication codes. Species that couldn't openly support humanity due to political pressure were helping in secret. Some sent encrypted messages expressing gratitude. Others simply provided the information without comment. The message was clear: finish what you started. Most species, however, chose a third option. They locked down their borders, pulled their ships back to defensive positions, and prayed that humanity's anger remained focused solely on the Crythians. Trade routes shut down. Diplomatic exchanges ceased. Entire sectors of the galaxy went quiet as civilizations hunkered down and waited to see how this would end. The Crythian Empire was dying. World after world fell to the human advance, not conquered in the traditional sense, but systematically dismantled. Human forces would arrive, eliminate all military presence, destroy every weapons facility and military installation, then move on. They weren't occupying territory. They weren't taking prisoners. They were erasing the Crythian military capacity to wage war, one world at a time. The empire that had once spanned 200 worlds shrank rapidly. 50 worlds lost in the first week, 100 by the end of the second. The Crythian military, which had seemed so powerful just months ago, was being methodically destroyed. Every tactic they tried failed. Every defensive strategy proved useless. The humans adapted faster than the Crythians could respond, always one step ahead, always knowing exactly where to strike next. The Crythian emperor, who'd given that triumphant speech just weeks ago, now faced the collapse of everything his people had built. His advisors brought him casualty reports that grew worse by the hour. His generals could offer no solutions. His diplomats found no one willing to help. In desperation, he authorized something that no Crythian emperor had done in 10,000 years. He tried to surrender. The message was broadcast on every frequency humanity monitored. The emperor appeared on screen, his proud bearing gone, replaced by exhaustion and fear. He offered unconditional surrender, complete disarmament, reparations, war crime trials. Anything humanity wanted, he begged them to stop, to show mercy, to remember that billions of Crythian civilians had nothing to do with Ambassador Foster's death. He even offered to execute the military commanders responsible for the attack on the Olive Branch. Humanity's response was silence. The assault continued without pause. Another 10 worlds fell while the Emperor's message was still being transmitted across the galaxy. The humans weren't interested in surrender. They weren't interested in trials or reparations or political solutions. They'd made their intentions clear from the beginning. This wasn't war. This was annihilation. Crythian military doctrine, developed and refined over millennia of warfare, proved completely inadequate. Their generals had studied every historical battle, every tactical scenario. They understood combined arms warfare, strategic logistics, and fleet coordination, but none of it mattered. The humans weren't fighting a conventional war. They were fighting with technology that broke the rules, strategies that didn't follow known patterns, and a level of coordination that suggested they were operating as one unified mind rather than separate units. By the 30th day, the Crythian Empire had been pushed back to its core territories. 50 worlds remained under their control, clustered around the homeworld of Crythia Prime. The Emperor evacuated to his ancestral capital, preparing for a last stand that everyone knew was futile. That's when the elder species decided they had to intervene. 3 of the oldest civilizations in the galaxy, species that had maintained peace and stability for thousands of years, couldn't stand by and watch this continue, not because they loved the Crythians, but because they feared what humanity had become. If humans could do this to an empire that had stood for millennia, what would stop them from doing to others? They assembled a fleet of 2,000 vessels, all bearing the marks of neutral peacekeepers. These weren't warships in the traditional sense, but heavily shielded diplomatic vessels designed to insert themselves between combatants and force negotiations. They positioned themselves in orbit around Krithia Prime, creating a barrier between the planet and the approaching human forces. The elder species broadcast their intentions clearly. They weren't there to fight. They were there to protect civilian populations and enforce a ceasefire. Surely humanity wouldn't attack neutral peacekeepers. Surely there were still lines the humans wouldn't cross. Commander James Mitchell led the human advance fleet toward Krithia Prime. His ships appeared at the edge of the system, dark angular vessels that had become symbols of terror across the galaxy. The peacekeepers hailed him immediately, their message urgent and desperate. Stand down. Negotiate. Find another way. Enough blood had been spilled. Mitchell's response wasn't weapons fire. Instead, his ships began emitting a signal, something operating on frequencies that shouldn't affect starship systems. But affect them it did. The peacekeepers watched in horror as their control panels went dark, navigation systems offline, life support switched to emergency backup, weapons and shields unresponsive, communication arrays dead. Every electronic system on every ship simply shut down simultaneously. The 2,000 vessels drifted helplessly as the human fleet passed by them like ghosts moving through fog. Mitchell didn't destroy them. He didn't need to. He demonstrated something far more terrifying than weapons. Humanity had developed the ability to simply turn off technology. They could reach into enemy systems and shut them down with a signal. Every ship in the galaxy was suddenly vulnerable in ways no one had imagined possible. On the 50th day after the first strike, human forces reached Krithia Prime, the capital world where the Krithian Empire was born 10,000 years ago, the seat of their government, the heart of their civilization, the planet from which they'd launched their expansion across the stars, the world whose military leaders had ordered the death of Rebecca Foster. The human fleet didn't rush in. They took up positions around the planet, hundreds of dark ships forming a perfect sphere. Every Krithian defensive satellite, every orbital weapons platform, every military installation pointed their weapons upward. But nobody fired. Everyone knew it wouldn't matter. The humans had come to deliver their final message, and nothing in the galaxy could stop them. The bombardment of Krithia Prime began at dawn, but it wasn't the kind of bombardment the galaxy had seen before. The human ships didn't unleash massive explosions that would crack the planet's surface or boil its atmosphere. This was surgical, precise, and somehow more terrifying because of it. Weapons fired from orbit, targeting specific buildings with accuracy measured in centimeters. The Imperial Palace, which had stood for 8,000 years, simply dissolved into dust, not exploded, not burned, just ceased to exist at the molecular level, leaving behind a perfect crater where it once stood. Military installations across the planet met the same fate. The great fortress of Kelshar, which had repelled 3 invasion attempts over the centuries, vanished in seconds. The Naval Command Center, the Army headquarters, weapons factories, missile silos, every structure tied to the Krithian military machine was methodically erased. Citizens watching from their homes saw monuments to their empire's power reduced to nothing, one after another, with mechanical efficiency. But the civilians weren't touched. Residential areas remained intact. Hospitals continued functioning. Schools, markets, farms, all the places where ordinary Krithians live their lives were left completely alone. This wasn't about killing people. This was about killing an empire, and the humans were making sure everyone understood the difference. The process took 3 days. Human ships worked in shifts, never pausing, never rushing, just systematically dismantling everything the Krithian Empire had built to project power. Government buildings that housed the bureaucracy of oppression, monuments celebrating military victories over conquered species, even the genetic banks where they'd stored biological weapons for future use. All of it turned to dust and scattered by the wind. On the 4th day, transport ships arrived, not human vessels, but converted civilian freighters from a dozen different species. The humans had arranged for the relocation of Krithia Prime's population. Every citizen would be moved to other Krithian worlds, the ones that had been agricultural or residential, not military strongholds. They would survive. They would rebuild. But they would do it without the empire that had defined them for 10,000 years. The Crythian emperor was given a choice. He could go with his people, living out his days as a private citizen on a farming world. Or he could face trial for crimes against humanity. He chose exile. The last emperor of the Crythian Empire walked onto a transport ship carrying nothing but the clothes he wore, surrounded by civilians who'd lost everything. The dynasty ended not with glory or martyrdom, but with a quiet shuffle into obscurity. When the relocations were complete, the human fleet departed. They left behind satellites that monitored the planet, automated defenses that would prevent any military buildup, and a simple message broadcast on every frequency. This world is now a monument, a reminder of what happens when peace is answered with violence. Any attempt to militarize this planet or rebuild the Crythian Empire will be met with the same response. The Crythian people may live. The Crythian Empire is dead. The galaxy struggled to process what had happened. 50 days. That's all it took for humanity to dismantle an empire that had stood for millennia. 50 days to reshape the political landscape of an entire sector. The Galactic Council called emergency session after emergency session, but no one knew what to say or do. The rules they'd operated under for thousands of years had just been rewritten by force. Finally, in a gesture born of desperation and fear, the Council made an offer. They would give humanity Ambassador Rebecca Foster's seat with full honors. They would create a memorial in the Council chambers. They would pay reparations. They would acknowledge their failure to act when she was killed. Anything to bring humanity back to the negotiating table, to restore some sense of normalcy. For weeks, the offer sat unanswered. Then General William Carter sent word that he would address the council in person. The chamber filled quickly, representatives from 5,000 civilizations cramming into a space designed for half that number. Everyone wanted to hear what humanity would say, what demand they would make, what price they would extract for peace. Carter walked to the speaking platform alone. No guards, no advisors, just one human standing before the assembled powers of the galaxy. He was quiet for a long moment, looking around the chamber, making eye contact with representatives who couldn't hold his gaze. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, but it carried to every corner of the vast space. "We came to you in peace," he said. "Rebecca Foster carried gifts from our world. Art, music, science, everything we thought was worth sharing with the galaxy. She was a teacher, not a soldier. She believed in dialogue, in understanding, in building bridges between different peoples. And one of yours murdered her for it." The chamber remained silent. Carter continued, "You all watched it happen. We showed you the footage. You saw an unarmed diplomatic vessel destroyed without warning, without provocation, without mercy. And what did you do? You formed an investigation committee. You scheduled hearings. You passed resolutions expressing concern. You did everything except deliver justice." He paused, letting that sink in. "So we delivered justice ourselves. We didn't ask for your permission. We didn't wait for your committees to finish their reports. We acted, and in 50 days, we erased an empire that you allowed to oppress dozens of species for centuries. That should tell you something about the difference between our civilizations." Some of the elder species representatives shifted uncomfortably. Carter's words cut deep because they were true. The Council had spent centuries managing the Crythian problem, containing it, negotiating with it, but never solving it. Humanity had solved it in less than 2 months. "We're not interested in your memorials or your reparations," Carter continued. "We don't want Foster's seat out of guilt or fear, but we will participate in galactic society on one condition. Let this be your new law, written in whatever formal language you prefer. Anyone who harms a human emissary, anyone who attacks our diplomatic missions, anyone who responds to our peaceful overtures with violence will face complete annihilation. Not war, not occupation, not regime change. Annihilation. Their military will be destroyed. Their government will be dismantled. Their empire will cease to exist. There will be no warnings, no second chances, no mercy." The chamber erupted in whispers and urgent conversations. Carter waited for them to quiet down before delivering his final statement. We came to join the galactic community as partners and friends. That offer still stands. We'll trade with you, share knowledge with you, work alongside you. But understand this. We are not supplicants begging for acceptance. We are not children seeking guidance from elder races. We are equals, and we will be treated as such. Test us on this at your own risk." He walked out without waiting for a response. The council dissolved into chaos, species arguing about how to respond, what it meant, whether they should accept humanity's terms or resist. But the debate was meaningless. Humanity had already reshaped the galaxy. The council was just catching up to reality. Over the following months, humanity did something unexpected. They resumed trade routes. They reopened embassies. They shared technology and cultural exchanges, just as Foster had intended. But they did it from a position of strength that no one could question. Human ships moved freely through space, and no one dared interfere with them. In the quiet corners of the galaxy, oppressed species watched and wondered. Small civilizations crushed under the heel of larger powers. Marginalized people tired of elder races making decisions for them. Colonies yearning for independence. They all saw the same thing. Humanity had proven that the old order could be challenged, that justice could be taken rather than begged for. Diplomatic overtures began arriving at Earth. Carefully worded requests for alliances, for mutual defense pacts, for friendship with a species that had torn down an empire in defense of a single murdered diplomat. Humanity considered each request carefully, building a network of genuine allies rather than subjects or dependencies. The balance of power had shifted permanently. The elder species still held their council seats, still maintained their vast territories, still commanded respect through age and experience. But everyone knew the truth now. The age of the old powers dominating galactic politics through inertia and tradition had ended. A new age had begun, and humanity stood at its center. It all started with one murder. One diplomat killed for trying to make friends. And it ended with a message carved into the ruins of an empire. Humanity does not forget, and humanity does not forgive. But more than that, it ended with hope. Hope that maybe, finally, the galaxy would learn to treat peace with the respect it deserved.